is the tire and there is the rotor, and you can see it even from here. It does not look good, so we're going to replace that. Replacing the rotor, I think, is really not that much harder than replacing brake pads. So if you can do one, you probably can do the other. Most important though, are you 100% certain you can remember that you'll have no chance of forgetting to tighten those lug nuts? If the answer is not 100%, then do not attempt this, because if there's even a slight chance you will forget, that's pretty much can be fatal. So, I mean, it's that serious. Do not even consider doing this job if you don't remember that. So, that's the first thing to remember. You're going to need a floor jack. The one that came with the car is garbage. I would not use that except, I guess, an emergency. Even this floor jack could be bigger. It's pretty small. Jack stand. The floor, always assume the car may slip, the jack may fail. So, yeah, get a jack stand as well. Even more than one, better. Unfortunately, I only have one right now, but yes, jack alone, that's just too risky. I wouldn't even think about that. If you emergency, yeah, you have to change a tire, but otherwise, yeah, jack stands. You really don't even need that many tools for this job, but the one that you really cannot get around, a C-clamp. If you don't have a C-clamp, go ahead and order one. I'll wait, because yeah, getting that cylinder compressed without it is just an impossible task. Screwdriver is not totally necessary. For my car, I need a 14 millimeter, a 17 millimeter, and an 18 millimeter, and that's it. And of course I have a torque wrench, which is pretty important for the lug nuts and other things, and a smaller 3/8 inch wrench too. And of course, you're gonna need the new rotor, and it's gonna probably come with brake pads, or at least make sure you get brake pads, because it'd be silly to do one without the other. But as far as what to get, that can range, but they're very simple pieces. As long as the quality of the workmanship is not bad and the material is not bad, it should be fine. But again, I imagine someone could make really shoddy rotors, and that wouldn't be good. And these, of course, are supposed to last the lifetime of the car, because most people end up selling their car before they go through that. That's why they give you the lifetime warranty. After making sure you know that you're going to tighten those lug nuts, I would say the next step, actually the first step, would be just to block the tires. On the other side, I use a 35-pound weight, works just fine. Brick can work, just whatever's gonna work. And I block the front as well. There's no reason not to block both. Once the tire is off, it's a good chance to clean that inside of the tire, which doesn't get cleaned very often. One of the things I do is set up a bucket, some paper, or just anything. This little guy is going to come off, and it needs a place to go, because this is still going to be hanging on by its hose. So you don't want to have it hanging just by the hose. That puts unnecessary stress on it. The bucket will give it a nice place to rest until it's ready to go back on again. But let's get that thing off. So 2 bolts in the back, and that's it. These 2 little bolts, and this should take it off just fine once I get it situated. Yep, there we go. I'll take that off next. 1, 2, and that thing will come slide right off. Now that the bolts are off, this should slide right out. And it will sit right there. Again, don't want to let it hang just on the wire. And now we get to the next part. So this goes around the rotor. It's kind of keeping the rotor on. And it too has a couple bolts. For me, it's 17 millimeter. One on the top, one on the bottom. And once that's done, this guy will come off. There's names for this. I don't know what they are. I probably did it one time. Okay, for me, it's just at an angle where I couldn't get the torque wrench in, so I'm using a universal adapter. Probably could twist the wheel out a little bit, it might fit, but this will work just as fine. Again, the torque wrench is probably good for this one because that is a pretty big bolt, 17 millimeter. So let's give it a shot. I didn't have a good angle on the torque wrench, so I decided to go ahead and use a reducer and a 3/8 inch 17 millimeter. Should work fine, but again, the bigger ½ inch is more preferred, but this just didn't fit. For the top bolt, I was able to get the torque wrench and ½ inch socket in there, so that's gonna help. Not a lot of clearance, and this takes a lot of torque on this one. This one is tight for good reason. All right, it took a bit of effort, but it is loose now, so this can unscrew. One note is that when you're doing these bolts like this in these tight spaces, or really anywhere, is to just use really caution if the bolt does strip or move or somehow break free. That all that torque pressure might go somewhere, and it might be your knuckles or fingers or hands hitting things. So it's just one common thing, is that can happen all the time if you're not careful. Okay, with both bolts out, these two little guys held it in. This will just come right off. Easy peasy. I got lucky with my rotor. It just comes right off. That's it. That's what's being replaced. These don't look too bad. A little rusty. And the new rotor fits right on. It'll be held in place by the wheel, of course, but for now, you just kind of have to push it in place. Next, we can go ahead and remove the old brake pads. They are done for their life. They're dirty. And even these little clips will be coming out too, since I do have replacements for them. And of course, while we're here, let's just do a bunch of cleaning, because why not? Also, it's good to note, nice to have gloves for this kind of stuff, is that brake pad debris and oil and grease and everything just gets in your fingers, and it can be tough to get out. So these can help. They don't last too long, especially under this kind of stress, but just put another pair on. Okay, the new rotor is in place, and time to get this thing back on. Back inside, and should be good to go. Okay, this is on, nice and tight. This will still be a little loose. Again, lug nuts and tire are what's going to keep this in place. So at this point, I'm just using the C-clamp to press in that piston, that cylinder, because otherwise it's not going to fit. You kind of do this a little slowly, gently, push it in a little, let it rest and decompress, and then do it again until it's nice and even with the surface here. So, about a ½ inch, I guess, is what it's going to take. Time to get the new pads in place. They will be a little tricky, but they kind of just slide in there. Sometimes they fight a little. All right, got the pads in place. Almost ready to put the tire back on. So the back one may be a little tricky to get in since it's hard to see. I actually use my camera reversed, and I can kind of see the bottom and top clips. You just have to kind of work it in there and kind of go into maybe a little bit of an angle, and it'll go on there, but it's definitely a lot trickier than the front side. But just don't force it too much, and it should be okay sooner or later. But it looks like that is ready to go. Finally got the grease on the back of the pads, not the inside, but the back side. And I can get that caliper clamp back on. The caliper clamp's going to be tight, so if it does not fit, then get out that C-clamp again and squeeze that cylinder, because you probably don't have it squeezed tight down in there enough. And once that's done, this will fit. It'll be tight, it'll be snug, but it'll go on. Came off. Okay. Caliper clamp back in place, nice and tight. You don't want to, of course, break or strip the nuts, but those things are the only things keeping these brakes on, so it's kind of important to make sure they're tight. Okay. Okay, the tire has been put on and I am now tightening the lug nuts to hand tight, and then we will go ahead and lower the car and then go down to torque tight. That's the final step. I don't consider putting the tire on the final step because, oops, should always make the final step. Torquing those right lug nuts. Okay. At this point, I get them a little tight, but not to the 100 foot-pounds tight. That happens when I put the car down because I don't want to hurt the wheel braking or anything like that. So these are about pretty snug. So I go ahead and lower the car. The wheel is on, the lug nuts have been tightened, and I went around and checked the other tires too. Wasn't any reason not to. So I think we're okay. First thing I'll do is just drive it around the neighborhood. I don't think the first drive should be the freeway or anything when you've done a job like brakes or rotors. Just to be sure, take some nice and easy drives first.